Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Happy Sabbath. Last week we discussed the story of the flood. Before that we spoke about Adam and Eve, and today we're going to be continuing down their line and getting to the next major patriarch, if you will, in the Bible. His name is Abram. And I'm going to give a little bit of backstory here. I'm not going to put these words up on the screen, but just so you know a little bit about Abram's backstory. Abram was Babylonian or Chaldean, if you've ever heard one of those two terms. Obviously, we only had the one family after the flood, Noah's family, and Noah had three sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and they all split off and had their own families, which created the different tribes in the world, the Amorites, Amalekites, Gershites, whatever shites or ites that you've heard of in the Bible, all branched off from those three. So the Babylonians came from Shem, and Noah was one of them. And it says that in verse 28, it says, "And Haran died before his father Terah in the native land in Ur of the Chaldeans." The Chaldeans is another name for the Babylonians. And that's in the lineage part that we're going to skip over a little bit. I've mentioned that the, so-and-so begat so-and-so begat so-and-so. They have their place in the Bible, and part of that is so that we know kind of the backstory of the people that we're looking at. But they're not really purposeful for a casual read-through or commentary, so that's why I leave those out. But it is important to know kind of his backstory because of what he ends up becoming. The Babylonians were a polytheistic group, kind of like how the Greeks and the Romans had their pantheon of the gods. Babylon had the same thing, and in particular, if I remember correctly, this is not specifically stated in the Bible, but it's believed that Abraham's family was from a group of people that worshipped the moon, which is kind of odd. But it mentions a little bit more about Abram. It says, after Haran died, it says, "Then Abram and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, and she had no child." I wanted to bring that up just briefly, because that's going to come into play as a major factor in Abram's story. But we're going to start in chapter 12. We're going to cover about 4 chapters today. Obviously, still jumping around like I have been. Not going to read through all of them. But starting in chapter 12, verse 1, and going to verse 4 to start off with, it says, "Now the Lord had said to Abram, 'Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.' So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran." So there's a few things to note here, 3 particularly prominent things. One, as I mentioned, Abram did not come from a family of Christians or Jews, as we might call them. He came from a family of polytheistic, artificial God worshippers. And yet, he was still able to hear God's voice, and God reached out to him specifically. And not only that, when he was spoken to by God, he obeyed without question. It could be that he thought it was one of the gods, that he didn't know who God was, or it could be that they taught who, Noah's God was alongside their polytheistic gods. I don't know. But the interesting thing is that he was able to recognize that, the supernatural was speaking to him and move out. 2, it mentions Lot. Lot is Abram's nephew. That's again mentioned in the genealogies of who is who. And the third thing is he was 75 years old. This is another thing that's going to come into play. You're starting to kind of put the picture together, right? Sarai has no children. Abraham is 75 years old. It's not a shocker that they have no children, right? So those are just kind of the pivotal beginning points of Abram's story. He goes on to talk about where he went. He ended up going to the land of Canaan. If you've ever seen that in the Bible, Canaan. It's not Canaan, it's Canaan. I actually had a friend named Canaan, and people would get his name wrong, and as a joke, I used to call him Captain Canaan. But it's beside the point. Anyway, if we move on to verse 10, we kind of pick up a little bit into the future. There's been a famine in the land of Canaan, and so Abram continues to the south. And it says, "Now there was a famine in the land, And Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, for the famine was severe in the land. Talking about the land of Canaan. So he had to leave Canaan. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai his wife, Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance. How sweet! Therefore, it will happen, when the Egyptians see you, that they will say, This is his wife. And they will kill me, but they will let you live. Please, say that you are my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. So it was, when Abram came to Egypt, that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful. The princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. He treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female servants, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister? I might have taken her as my wife. Now therefore here is your wife. Take her and go your way. So Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. So it's interesting that he was able to recognize the voice of God. He then obeyed God, and recall that God had made this promise that he would make him a great nation, and yet Abram did not quite trust God yet. We see that because he was afraid for his life. If he had trusted God and God said, I will make you a great nation, you're going to have a bunch of descendants, he would have thought to himself, well, I don't have those yet. Obviously, he's going to spare me from whatever's coming so that I can have those children. But instead, we see that he was afraid for his life, and he told his wife essentially to lie for him in order to save his life. But we also see that through this, even though it was a bit dishonest, he was given a little bit of wealth by Pharaoh. And when Pharaoh sends him away, he doesn't take it back. He just says, get out. I don't want to see you. Get out. Leave with all your stuff. And as it continues, he goes back to the land of Canaan, specifically the area of Bethel where he was, and he comes to a head because he and Lot now both have considerable flocks. That was a lot of what wealth was back then, is having a lot of animals, because it provides you with clothing through wool and provides you with food, and it's essentially like having a lot of money. And if we jump down to chapter 13, verse 8, we realize that there is a problem. They're both very wealthy, and there's not enough land for all of their animals to feed. So in verse 8, So Abram said to Lot, Please, let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted his eyes, and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. This is just a little historical note. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, as you go toward Zoar. Then Lot chose for himself all the plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated from each other. Abram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. We can see here a couple of things. One, Abram is not out to be selfish. He's not out to, absolve Lot's herd and, conglomerate it into his and become this, megalo-billionaire of his age. He's not interested in that. He's just prosperous because he's a good worker and he just happens to be prosperous. Of course, some of it is from Pharaoh, which he got dishonestly, but, his goal is not, to trick everybody and take their stuff. His goal is, I want to have peace with you. You're my family member. Let's not run into each other's territory. Let's kind of split off into two groups because we're getting too big. But he also doesn't take the first choice. He doesn't say, okay, look, we're too big. I'm going to go over here. You get the crap land. He says, no, you pick whatever land you want and I'll take the leftovers. And of course, Lot, being human, looks at the land, says, hey, that land looks pretty good. I'm going to go live there. And we see kind of one of the downfalls of mankind is we see the outward appearance, right? It says he chose the beautiful land that was well watered, but the people that were living there were evil. And Lot didn't know that before he made that choice. Lot, like Abram, is a man of God. He worships God. He's Abram's been his role model most of his life. And yet he ends up in Sodom, where it says they were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. So it's important to remember that, this is kind of the origin of the grass is always greener on the other side, right? He sees this greener grass, he goes to it, and it turns out, maybe I shouldn't be here. And we'll see a little bit more on that later, but for the moment, let's jump to chapter 14, verse 10, and we'll see kind of what happens initially to Sodom and Gomorrah, and obviously some of us may know what happens later, but we're not going to get to that. What happens initially is there's a war that breaks out, and Sodom and Gomorrah each have kings, they're big cities, and they go off and fight in this war, and they lose. And so starting in chapter 10, it says, "Now the valley of Siddim was full of asphalt pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. Some fell there, and the remainder fled to the mountains. Then they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way," talking about the other kings that they were at war with. "They also took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, for he dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, the Amorite, brother of Eshcol and brother of Aner, and they were allies with Abram. Now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive," his brother being Lot, he's referring to his nephew, "he armed his 318 trained servants who were born in his own house, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces against them by night, and he and his servants attacked them and pursued them as far as Hobah, which is north of Damascus. So he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people." What a Chad, as they would say in today's terms, right? What a hero. Abram is like, oh, they took Lot? Not on my watch. I'm going to go get him. And so he does. He takes all of the military-ready men that he knows and has, lived with, and he says, all right, guys, we got a job to do. Let's go defeat these kings and their armies. And I don't know if it was just, they were under guard of a small contingent. I don't know exactly what happened, but still, that takes a lot of courage, right? Earlier we saw Abram as, almost a coward, right? Because he's, I don't want to die. Lie for me. I don't want to die. And here it says, no, I don't care. I'm risking my life. We're going to get Lot. And so we can see that, that was not exactly a fair casting of his character earlier when we see him lying to save his own skin. Because it's not that he is afraid to die. It's that people have moments of weakness, right? And we see these in the patriarchies. We see, Adam and Eve were, for the most part, holy people, but they introduced sin into the world, and they had to suffer for it. Noah, we didn't really cover it in the last video, but Noah got completely wasted after the flood. He was found drunk in a cave by his children. And it's like, these people weren't perfect. We see them as these historical men of faith and these, pillars of Christianity, but they weren't perfect people. And we're going to see that theme all throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. People are not perfect, and that's okay. But here we see that, Abram really is trying to be a righteous and just man. He says, Lot's innocent. Lot just happened to move there, and he got taken captive with the rest of the city. And he's like, I'm going to go take back Lot. And then when he gets there, he's like, you know what? I'm going to take back everybody. I'm going to rescue the whole town. And he does. And if we jump down to verse 21, we'll see the story continue. It says, "Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, 'Give me the persons and take the goods for yourself.'" Seems like a reasonable king. He's not trying to be greedy. He's like, give me back my people and you can keep, the reward. You deserve a reward for your heroism. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth." The possessor of heaven and earth. Yeah, the professor. The possessor of heaven and earth, that I will take nothing, from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, his 3 allies from before. Let them take their portion. So Abram, again, we see that his goal is not accumulating material wealth. He's not trying to get a reward for this. He didn't do it because he was going to get rich. He did it because it was the right thing to do. But he is also compassionate to his allies, those 3 people, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre, who we saw earlier in the passage. That says those were his allies. And he says, I'm not going to speak for them. If they want to take a reward, let them take one. So he's not, trying to, he's not going for power. He doesn't want to control them. He's not going for wealth. He's just trying to do the right thing. And so jumping to, I guess we're not really jumping. Continuing on, we now hit chapter 15. And it says, in verse 1, It says, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. But Abram said, Lord God, what will you give me, seeing I go childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus? Then Abram said, look, you have given me no offspring. Indeed, one born in my house is my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, this one shall not be your heir, but one who will come from your own body shall be your heir. Then he brought him outside and said, look now toward heaven, and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your descendants be. And he believed the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. So we see, again, Abram is feeling frustrated. He's 75 years old. God comes to him and says, I need you to leave your family. I need you to go to the land that I tell you to go to, and I'm going to give you offspring. I'm going to give you children. And then he goes through all of the, he goes through famine, he goes through war, and he says, God, you still haven't given me a kid. What's the deal? Where's your promise at? Why do I not have one? And so God reassures him. He doesn't tell him when it's going to happen, but he says, listen, I told you I'm going to give you a kid. I'm going to give you a kid. And not just one, you're going to have millions of descendants through that bloodline. It says you can't even number the stars, and you're going to have more kids than that. Right? And importantly, in that last verse, in verse 6, he believed the Lord, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say he accounted his noble act in rescuing Lot as righteousness. It doesn't say he accounted, him giving Lot the first choice of where to live as righteousness. It says he believed the Lord, and that was accounted to him for righteousness. And it's funny, we see a lot of New Testament ideas presented in the Old Testament. Again, a lot of people say that, we're under the New Testament and not the Old, and the God of the Old Testament is a vengeful, hateful God, and he's not merciful like he was in the New Testament. And yet, here we see it's the exact same principle we live by now. We can't earn our way to salvation. We've never been able to do that. In order to do that, you'd have to keep God's law perfectly. And even the first two people, Adam and Eve, they couldn't do it. They messed up. And now, we all mess up. We all make mistakes. But God doesn't say, do everything right and that'll be accounted to you for righteousness. He does want us to do the right things. He does want us to be sanctified and be holy insofar as we can. We're supposed to be striving in our strength to be that. But he doesn't ask us to be perfect. He knows that we can't be perfect. He asks us to believe him, to trust him, and he will count that as righteousness. Now going to our last passage, you'll notice that this video is going to be a bit shorter than the others, and I apologize for that, but there's a reason. Chapter 16, verse 1. We're just going to read the first 4 verses. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. We're still on that same trend, right? She's still barren, okay? And she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, see now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. And Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. So this is a bit of a trip, right? For anybody who's married out there, no guy would ever trust his wife if she was like, hey, you want to sleep with this other woman? His first reaction would be, I'm sorry? Did you what? You want me to what? Are you crazy? Right? No. But it says Abram was like, okay, this is your idea. I'm down. It's a bit odd. We have to remember, obviously, that they were in a different cultural period, but it's interesting to me that it wasn't Abram who, was questioning God, saying, where's my child? Why haven't you given me a child? He's not the one that said, hey, let's rush this process. Let's, try breeding with somebody else and maybe he'll give me a child that way. But Sarai says, you know what? He said you would get a child from your body. He didn't say it would be from mine. Maybe we're supposed to sleep with, a younger woman so that she can have children. Because remember, Sarai is, a very old age as well. It says they've been, 10 years and still no kids. So now Abraham is 85 and, Sarai is, fairly old as well. I don't remember her exact age off the top of my head. But they're clearly past the age of normal conception, right? By at least by today's standards of what normal conception would be. And so she's trying to come up with her own plan. And we do that a lot, don't we? We pray to God and we say, okay, help me with this and that, or help me with this and that, or help me with this and that, or help me to do this, and we'll even pray like, Lord, show me your will. But then we already have an idea in our heads of what that should be, right? We say, God, help me to follow your will. And then we're just like, I'm going to hope his will is this. And we go do something. And I'm not suggesting that we should, sit on our laurels and wait and do nothing instead of doing something. But the point is that we all tend to try to take things into our own hands instead of relying on God and his timing. And I've been guilty of it. I'm not immune from that. I'm not immune from any of this, really. I'm not, I try to be an honest person, but I've, it's not like I've never lied, right? It's not like I've never made mistakes, right? Like I said, we're all human. We all make mistakes. And that one is just very common. But that's also where we're going to stop for today. We're going to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger because Abram's story is a bit of a two-parter. He is only Abram in the first half. In the second half, he will become Abraham. And we'll see more of what happens with that in the next one. As I mentioned in the previous video, if you have any questions or comments, there is an email for that. I'm not going to list it out every time now. I'm sure that would get old if I kept doing that, but it will be down in the description. It's higherwaysqnas at gmail.com. It's higherwaysqnas@gmail.com. Promise I'm not going to bring it up in every video. I'll just leave it in the description from now on. But if you have a question or comment, just an insight, anything, you just want to reach out to me, feel free. You don't have to be, if you're a stranger, you've never seen me before in your life, hi, how are you? My name's Kyle. Feel free to send me an email anyway. You don't have to be my friend or anything. It's just, if you want to say something, say something. And if not, that's fine too. I'm not going to pressure you into it. But that's where we're going to stop for today. And we're going to see what happens with Hagar and Sarai and Abram in the next video. So until then, I'll see you later.